This lecture is about ethics and ethical theories. It's kind of an overview of different ethical theories. Um, Today, you're going to read about two hypothetical cases that happen in fictional campaigns. Um, and as you read the little story about what happened in the campaign, you're going to be asked to have a discussion like you've had numerous times before, where you're going to post a comment about the first story and then you're going to respond to some people. And then you're going to read a second story and you're going to post another thing about that story. So you'll have two posts on each story and responses for each. And to help you think about the uh, stories in a more ethical way, I'm going to talk about some theories that you may or may not know about. Um, if you know about these, great. This kind of review. If you don't, these are just ethical theories that people can use to help navigate different problems. None of these are right or wrong. They're just tools in your toolkit, your mental toolkit, to help you think uh, about problems and solve problems. So that's what this is really for, is to help you think through some of these stories a little bit differently. So kind of start with um, ethics and morality. The two of those are often married. They are not the same thing, though. Ethics is actually a reflection on morality. So you have your morals. Your morals are not your ethics. Your morals are your morals, what you believe is right, wrong, whatever, and you get that from religion or from laws. Running a stop sign is wrong. How do we know this? Because the government told us, right? You're a person of faith. Your faith says X, then that is your morals. Your ethics are how you act on that. Your ethics are what behaviors fall out of that come from your moral compass that's guiding you, whether it's legal things, laws, and codes like that, or whether it's religious, or if you're agnostic or atheist and you have sort of just a philosophical bent towards reason or something. Whatever those may be, those are your morals, and your ethics is how you attack the problem. So as you think about the assignment today and you think about the situations, you're thinking about the problem, and then what do your morals say? Morally, where do you come from? And then how will you address it? So um, there are some things that often short circuited when we talk about ethics. People get really uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about ethics. I don't want to talk about. No, we need to. We have to. Um, in a world where more and more people are moving into echo chambers and moving away from a discernible, agreed upon set of facts, it's becoming even more important for us to think about morals and think about ethics and think about how we have these conversations. So when people say, um, I disagree with you on gun rights, so we're just done. Well, no, you're not done. Maybe find other things that you agree on. Instead of sort of slamming the door because you disagree on the end of one thing, find with solutions, find things where you agree on other parts of it. Um, who am I to judge? A lot of times people make those comments. Who am I to judge? Or different cultures do different things, and that idea is known as moral relativism, and it's an idea that sort of says morals are relative to wherever you're from, whatever cultures you come from, and there is a lot of validity in that, and there's a lot of to use a word you all use a lot, woke. It's a very woke thing to say, but it's also a very dangerous thing to say because um, just just because a society does something doesn't make it moral in a larger sense. If we're going to try to have some common ground about what is moral, we need to start thinking about um, certain things. The Nazis are the classic example of this, right? The Nazis sent millions of people to their death, and all under the guise of the government saying it was okay. Um, we know that's not morally acceptable. And so um, these are things that short circuit ethical conversations. And in your responses and in your conversations, in your discussions, I want us to steer away from things like this. This is not the road to go down when we're trying to have conversations about ethics and morals, like with this campaign, these fictional campaign stories I'm going to share with you at the end of this. Those are these are things that we steer away from. So we really need ethics because some of the things that we go to don't necessarily work. So you could be like, well, follow the golden rule, do unto others as you have them do unto you. Well, that's kind of tricky because what I would do unto someone may not be what they would want done to them, for one thing, and they may not act or appreciate that. So we have to understand that even some of our sayings about behaving ethically are problematic. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Well, as a straight white middle aged man, what I want done to me is probably not the same thing that a um, Native American lesbian woman who grew up in an impoverished reservation in New Mexico would want. So it doesn't always translate. So following your own conscience is again one of these things where we have to unpack that because there are obviously people who think it's right, and, and their conscience leads them to fly airplanes into towers or to be suicide bombers or to drive trucks full of TNT into federal buildings, and they're following their conscience. But that's again something we have to say. Well, that's not moral. That's not ethical, and we have to call that out. We can't allow that to be part of the conversation. And also time and context change. What was appropriate 100 years ago is no longer appropriate today. We evolve as people, and as we evolve, our ethical theories need to evolve, and the tools that we use to unpack the morals that we have evolve as well. And so, um, with time and context, those changes evolve. We need to evolve with them. So, ethics helps us. Ethical theories can help us evolve over time. So there's a type of ethics by John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham, called consequential ethical theories. And they're asking the question, what results from an action? We have action A. Action A happens. What then is the result of that action? And they're looking for the social utility. They're looking for a way to sort of measure the happiness of that. And their school of thought is called utilitarianism. It's a very common school of thought. And they say, an act is good if it results in the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And that sounds really good when you hear it. Well, you got 100 people living here. That's great. And I'm going to do thing X. And thing X is going to make 51 of them happy. That's great for 51 people. But for 49 people, not good. So, utilitarianism on its, just if you scratch the surface very narrowly, you'll see, yeah, it sounds good. 51 out of 100 people are happy, but it doesn't really do much for the minority, and then oftentimes it can hurt the minority. Um, it can actively depress or oppress the minority. And so that's one kind of school of thought. Then there's a deontological theories, which are duty based. This is a fancy word for duty based ethical theories. And Kant is kind of the father of these. And this is premised on the idea that we have rational natures, that we think rationally, that we behave rationally, um, and that, you know, generally, um, all people have the same uh, moral worth. In other words, my value is no greater than your value, and your value is no greater than that person's value. And so, as everyone has equal value, and everyone is rational, then if those things are true, then the ethics that we carry out, the ethics that we live with, should follow that pattern. So he has something called the categorical imperative, where as rational people with rational wills, we are commanded to act ethically. So we will then, by our own reason, be led into following morals that benefit us all, right? That bind us as reasonable and rational people. And as long as you do something that meets these certain criteria of being reasonable and rational and not going against society and not harming anybody, then you can make a defensible case that what you're doing is moral. And so that's Kant in a very quick overview. Um, some things to think about with that is that sometimes your duties, your calls, are on two different sides of a coin, and you got to make decisions. Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement is a great example of this, right? It's illegal for an African American to go into a lunch counter or to sit in the front of the bus. That's the actual duty. That is the thing. That is what institutions are telling you. African Americans cannot sit in the front of the bus or sit in a lunch counter. But the self evident duty, the, that justice and honesty is what King spoke to so much when King and other civil rights leaders, John Lewis, crossed the bridge for Voting Rights Act, when they sat in the lunch counters to integrate, when the Little Rock Nine walked into Central High School. This is when duty for justice and honesty is sometimes at odds with the actual legal duty of what was written. And so there's often can be a tension there that has to get worked out. And the way we come to that is through studying moral leaders like King or Gandhi, people who, or Nelson Mandela, people who have who are saying this is unethical, this is not right, and this goes against the moral code of humanity. This breaks the moral and reasonable uh, code that does sort of define humanity. There are contract-based ethical theories, and this is kind of Hobbes makes me laugh a little bit. He doesn't really like people. Um, he basically thinks people are greedy, self-interested, selfish individuals, and without a strong dictatorial ruler or king, people are going to do the rotten thing. Um, so he really is a firm believer in having a strict legal code. Um, that the people are not moral. The people don't have any kind of moral center or compass, and they need the direction of legal codes and laws. And so that's Hobbes. Um, Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Aquinas, I kind of had a different view. Their view is a little bit different, and their view is that people would be reasonable and rational and good, and with minimal laws and guidelines would do the right thing. Uh, that being said, it's not a perfect system. I'm going to give up some of my privacy rights. I'm going to give up some of my complete and utter rights to privacy for the betterment of society. Um, but as Thomas Jefferson says, Benjamin Franklin says, you give up some of those rights so that you can live in a social contract with others. And so it's not a free for all. And it's also not a dictator or king telling you how to live. You have a sense of, I have inalienable rights. I have rights that are intrinsic to me. I have rights that are part of my moral code within me that I can experience. I may not be able to experience them to their fullest extent, but I still can experience them. Plato talked about character-based ethics. In other words, that you build them over time and habits, that no one is born ethical. Just like no one is born uh, a star soccer player or athlete of any kind. If you are a star athlete, you work at it. You every day are on the field practicing. Even in your spare time, you're doing everything you can to create traits and habits that will make you a successful athlete. Same goes then with Plato for morality. To be a moral person, to be doing the right thing, requires of you to develop the traits of kindness and truthfulness and honesty and helpfulness and generosity and justice. You have to develop those. You have to think about what those are, develop them, practice them, work on them day in and day out. And that again sounds relatively easy. And in Plato's homogeneous society, where everyone was an Athenian Greek, so everyone was look the same, sound the same, talk the same, right? It's pretty easy to do that. It's much more difficult in a pluralistic society where, like the example I used at the beginning of this, the young Native American woman in a reservation in New Mexico is going to have a very different set of ideas behind truthfulness, honesty, trustworthiness, and helpfulness, as opposed to a straight white man who lives in Kentucky. These things, they're going to have to get worked out because there's going to be a big difference between those two. The one I'm going to end with, John Rawls, is a just consequentialist theory, and he comes up with kind of a way to consider ethics, which we're going to end with this in a minute. But he says, you don't do any harm. Don't actively do any harm. Just support the ideas of justice and righteousness, and try to remove yourself from situations and be impartial. Try not to bring your positionality. Try not to bring who you are in the social pyramid to bear on what's going on. Try to view things apart from that, and consider the consequences. Right? Um, every decision has a consequence, and as you look at the consequences of those decisions, which consequence is going to be the best? Which consequence is going to lead to your happiness, the happiness of others, the happiness of the system overall? Which is going to really bend that arc of justice, that arc towards justice? How do your decisions play out? Not just how do you make the decision, but what is the outcome of your decision? So I'm going to end with this thought experiment that John Rawls came up with in the 1970s. It's called the veil of ignorance, and it's represented here in this screen, but basically goes like this. Imagine that you are not on the planet. You've not been born, right? You have no knowledge of who you are. What you do have knowledge of is the way the world works. You can observe the world from up high in the sky. You observe the world. You know that the world has all of these social classes and physical capabilities and race and economics and all of these things that we know about the planet. You know those exist. You know that there are impoverished reservations in the United States. You know that there are starving children in Somalia. You know that there are urban ghettos across the world, urban slum dwellers who are living in horrific conditions. But you also know that there are exceedingly and exceptionally wealthy people in Silicon Valley and exceptionally wealthy people and powerful people in governments and incredibly strong people in military. And so you realize all of that, but you do not know, nor do you have any control over where you're going to be born or where you're going to end up. All you know is that you're going to end up on this planet. And if that were the case, if you were behind this veil of ignorance, not knowing if you would be in a Native American reservation struggling with fetal alcohol syndrome, or in a slum in Detroit, or in you know the hollows of Kentucky, or if you were going to be born in one of the richest zip codes in America, you didn't know where you were going to end up. But you just knew you were going to end up somewhere. John Rawls says, knowing that, thinking about that, design a society. Design a society not knowing what zip code you would live in, not knowing what race you would be, not knowing what gender you might be, or what sex you might be, or what economic class you might be. Not knowing any of those things, not knowing where any of those things might fall out. You don't know where you'll end up. You've got to design a society. And if that were the call, if that was what you were being tasked with doing, the society that you would design would not look like the society we're living in now. It would look very, very different, because you wouldn't know where you'd end up. And so I want to say that this is kind of a very quick um, overview of ethics. I'm going to bring up the assignment, and I want to show you the assignment because it's worth uh, kind of talking about in terms of the hypothetical that we're working on. And so the first one is this campaign ethics. And you're going to read this dilemma down here. It's about George Blackwell is in a dead heat with his opponent. Um, he gets some information from a donor to that his opponent is having an affair, and then he ends up uh, desperate for the donor's money and trying to improve himself in this polls. He could certainly use the money. So Blackwell directs one of his campaign staffers to go to the press with this information about his opponent having an affair. And then the question is, did Blackwell make an ethical choice? So as you think about that, you can think about the various forms of ethics I just went over. And did he make the right choice? Did he make the ethical choice? You can use any of these ethical theories that I talked about to say whether or not he did or didn't. If you just kind of your mind's being blown by all the stuff I said, just think about it for a minute and then tell me why or why not. in the discussion. Um, these theories, I mean, you don't have to quote them in your answer. I just went over them because I think it's helpful to have this kind of stuff in your mind as you're thinking about this. Um, the other one is discussion two, um, about some drunk college kids who may or may not have removed some yard signs, from your some yard signs that belong to your opponent, and what the response would be, right? So again, I'm not looking for you to sit here and quote to me consequentialist theory or character based theory. I'm not asking you to do that, but I am asking you to think about which of these theories you feel a kinship to, which of these theories you feel a little connection to, and then answer these questions and try to think about why you're answering it that way. Don't just say he made a bad choice because that's wrong and you shouldn't do that to someone. That's the kind of short circuiting of an ethical conversation that I want to avoid. I want to avoid those kinds of short circuited, well, he did the wrong thing, he's a bad man, he shouldn't have done that, we all have problems. Yeah, we do all have problems, but let's dig a little deeper into why we all have problems. Let's think a little bit more about it. And so that's you're going to do discussions on these two things. Um, so I'm gonna ask that you do that you do this